The sun dipped low over the city skyline, casting golden hues across the horizon. Ezra wiped the sweat from his brow as he stacked the last crate of vegetables onto the wooden stall, his hands rough from years of labor. The marketplace was alive with energy, vendors shouting their final prices, children weaving through the crowd, the scent of spices and roasted corn lingering in the evening air. It was a life he had known since childhood, a cycle of hard work and small victories. He didn't complain, he had learned to find contentment in the simplicity of it all. Yet, on some nights, when he sat alone under the fading light, he couldn't help but wonder, was there more to life than this? Across town, in a grand estate with marble floors and walls lined with priceless paintings, Celeste stared blankly out of her bedroom window. The sun's reflection shimmered off the pool below, but she barely noticed. Her life was mapped out before her, dinners with socialites, business meetings she had no interest in, and a father who measured love in financial success. From the outside, she had everything: designer clothes, luxury cars, and education at the finest schools. But inside, she felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage, her wings clipped by expectations she never agreed to. She longed for something real, something that wasn't calculated or planned for her. But what was the point of longing for something she couldn't even define? The collision of their worlds happened in the most unremarkable way, through circumstance rather than fate. Celeste's sleek black sedan rolled to a stop near the marketplace one afternoon, the engine sputtering before going silent. Her driver muttered something about needing a mechanic and stepped away to make a call. She tapped her nails against the window impatiently before finally stepping out, her heels clicking against the dusty pavement. The marketplace, so full of noise and movement, felt completely foreign to her. She glanced around, discomfort clear in her expression. Then, her gaze landed on a young man stacking crates nearby. He was watching her with quiet curiosity, sweat glistening on his brow from a long day's work. Ezra had seen many wealthy people pass through the market before, businessmen looking for exotic spices, tourists taking photos of what they called authentic local life. But this woman was different. She didn't have the air of someone here for an experience or a transaction. She looked lost, not just in the marketplace but in some deeper, unspoken way. He hesitated before stepping closer. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice steady. Celeste turned to him, surprised. She was used to polished businessmen and chauffeurs, not rough-handed market vendors offering assistance. Still, there was something sincere about him, something that made her say, "Yes, I think I do." Ezra walked over to her car, wiping his hands on his jeans before lifting the hood. He wasn't a mechanic, but he had fixed enough old engines in his time to recognize the problem. A loose connection, easy to fix. Within minutes, he had the car running again. Celeste watched in fascination. She had never seen someone work with such ease, solving a problem with his hands instead of making a phone call to have it handled. "You're good at this," she said, almost without thinking. Ezra just shrugged. "I get by." He closed the hood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Should be fine now." She reached into her purse, pulling out a crisp bill. "Here, for your trouble." Ezra looked at the money but didn't take it. "No need," he said simply. That caught her off guard. Everyone in her world expected something in return: favors, payments, leverage. But this man was different. "Are you sure?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. He nodded. "Just glad I could help." And with that, he turned back to his stall, as if fixing luxury cars for wealthy strangers was just another part of his day. Celeste hesitated for a moment before tucking the money back into her purse. As she drove away, she found herself glancing at him in the rearview mirror, wondering why someone like him had refused something as simple as a reward. The thought of the market boy lingered in her mind longer than she expected. It wasn't just that he had helped her, it was the way he had done it. He had no agenda, no ulterior motive, no interest in impressing her. In her world, everyone was always performing, always trying to be seen in the best light. But Ezra had been real. She hated to admit it, but that brief interaction had stirred something in her. It made her question the people around her, the life she was so accustomed to. She told herself she was just intrigued, nothing more. But the following week, she found herself back in the marketplace. She didn't have a reason, at least, not one she was willing to acknowledge. She walked through the stalls, pretending to browse, though her eyes searched for something, or rather, someone. It didn't take long before she spotted him, arranging oranges in neat stacks. He noticed her too, his eyebrows raising slightly in recognition. "Back again?" he asked, amusement lacing his voice. Celeste felt a strange sense of embarrassment, as if she had been caught in something she wasn't supposed to be doing. "Just wanted to see the market," she replied. It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. Ezra didn't press her for answers, though. Instead, he handed her an orange. "Try this. Sweetest in the whole market." She hesitated before accepting it, peeling back the skin and biting into the fruit. The burst of flavor surprised her, it was sweeter than anything she'd ever tasted. "You're right," she admitted, licking the juice from her lips. Ezra grinned. "Told you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the noise of the market fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Celeste felt normal. Like she wasn't the daughter of a wealthy businessman, like she wasn't bound by expectations. Just a girl in a marketplace, eating an orange given to her by a stranger. That was the beginning. Neither of them planned for it to happen, but slowly, their interactions became more frequent. Celeste would return under the pretense of buying fruit or spices, but she always ended up talking to Ezra. They spoke of small things at first, favorite foods, childhood memories, the funny things they saw in the market. But over time, the conversations deepened. Celeste talked about feeling trapped in a life she didn't choose. Ezra shared his fears of never escaping the cycle of poverty. They were from two different worlds, yet somehow, they understood each other in ways no one else did. Celeste never expected to find comfort in the marketplace, but over time, it became a place where she could simply exist without expectations. She visited more often, blending into the lively chaos as she learned the rhythms of the vendors. Ezra, despite his initial amusement, grew accustomed to her presence. He didn't ask why she kept coming back, and she never explained. It was an unspoken understanding between them. He would hand her the freshest fruit, tease her about her delicate city hands, and she would listen to him talk about his life, about the stubborn customers, the rising prices, the small victories of a good sales day. They were comfortable in each other's presence, even though their worlds were never meant to overlap. But not everyone saw it that way. The other vendors noticed her visits, whispering among themselves. Who was this rich girl, lingering where she didn't belong? Some admired Ezra for catching the attention of someone so wealthy, while others scoffed at the idea. "People like her don't stay," an old fruit seller warned him one evening. "They visit, they taste, they leave." Ezra brushed it off, but the words stayed with him. He had no illusions about who Celeste was. She had a life that stretched far beyond the marketplace, a future paved with privileges he could never afford. He told himself not to get attached, but the more time they spent together, the harder that became. Celeste, too, felt the weight of their differences. At home, her father had already begun making plans for her, talks of a future with the son of one of his business partners, a merger disguised as a marriage. "You'll thank me one day," he told her, as if love was something she could be convinced into. She wanted to argue, to tell him that she wasn't some investment to be traded, but she had fought these battles before and lost every time. Instead, she stayed silent, pushing back her frustration until it became unbearable. And when it did, she found herself in the marketplace again, the only place where she could breathe. One evening, as the sun began to set, she and Ezra sat on the steps of a closed stall, sharing a bag of roasted peanuts. The sky was painted in soft oranges and purples, the kind of view that made everything feel infinite. "What do you want, Celeste?" Ezra asked suddenly, his voice quieter than usual. She peeled open a peanut shell, thinking. No one had ever asked her that before. People always told her what she should want, what was expected of her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Something different. Something real." She turned to him. "What about you?" Ezra exhaled, gazing at the horizon. "I just want enough. Enough to not worry about tomorrow. Enough to have something that's mine." His dream was simple, but for someone like him, it was a mountain to climb. Celeste admired that about him, his quiet resilience, his ability to hope even when the odds were against him. He didn't dream of riches or power. He just wanted to build a life with his own hands. And for the first time, she wished she could trade places with him, just to know what it felt like to want something so pure. But reality had a cruel way of creeping in. One evening, as Celeste returned home, she found her father waiting in the foyer. He had never concerned himself with where she spent her time before, but something about his expression told her that had changed. "You've been seen in the marketplace," he said, his voice measured. Celeste froze. "So?" she challenged, though her heart pounded. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "So, people are talking. You don't belong there, Celeste. And you certainly don't belong with him." She clenched her fists. "Ezra is my friend." The word felt too small for what he meant to her, but it was the only one she dared to say. Her father scoffed. "He's a nobody. You're a Vandermeer." His voice was laced with disgust, as if the very thought of Ezra was offensive. "You will cut ties with him immediately." Celeste stared at him, feeling something break inside her. "And if I don't?" she asked, testing the limits of her defiance. Her father's expression hardened. "Then I will make sure he regrets ever knowing you." The threat was not empty. Celeste knew her father's influence could make life unbearable for Ezra. He could have vendors refuse to buy from him, push him out of the market entirely. She had seen him destroy people before, competitors, employees who dared to cross him. She couldn't let Ezra become another casualty. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, weighing the impossible choice before her. If she stayed away, she would lose the only real connection she had ever known. But if she kept seeing him, he would pay the price. The next day, she didn't go to the marketplace. Nor the day after that. Ezra noticed her absence, though he tried not to let it bother him. She wasn't his to miss. But as the days turned into weeks, a hollow feeling settled in his chest. He told himself she had probably gotten bored, moved on, just like the vendors had warned. He had been foolish to believe otherwise. Celeste, on the other hand, felt trapped in her father's world once more. She attended dinners with people she didn't care for, smiled when she was supposed to, played the perfect daughter. But nothing felt real anymore. Not after Ezra. She had tried to let go, but the loss of him felt like losing a piece of herself. She had to see him, one last time, even if it meant saying goodbye properly. That evening, as the sun set over the marketplace, she found him where he always was, stacking crates with quiet determination. He looked up, surprised, but there was something guarded in his expression. "You're back," he said. She nodded, but she didn't move closer. "I never wanted to disappear," she said softly. "My father, he threatened you. I had to stay away." Ezra's jaw tightened, but he didn't look shocked. He had always known her world was cruel. "So why are you here now?" Celeste swallowed. "Because I couldn't stay away forever." She wanted to tell him everything, that he had become the only thing that made sense in her life, that she had never felt so lost without him. But the words tangled in her throat. Ezra watched her for a long moment before exhaling. "Celeste, we live in different worlds. And in yours, I'll always be a risk." He wasn't angry, just resigned. And that hurt more than if he had yelled. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Then let's leave. Both of us. Start over somewhere new." It was reckless, unrealistic, but she didn't care. Ezra hesitated, looking at her with something unreadable in his eyes. For a brief moment, she thought he might say yes. But then he shook his head. "I can't, Celeste. My life is here. My family is here. I can't run from that." Tears burned her eyes. "Then what do we do?" she whispered. Ezra looked toward the horizon, where the last sliver of the sun dipped below the city. "We chase the same sunset," he murmured. "No matter where we are." Celeste followed his gaze, understanding settling in her heart. They might not be together, but they would always share this moment, this sky. And so, she left. But as she stepped away, she knew she would never truly be gone. Because love, even when bound by circumstance, had a way of lingering, like the warmth of the sun, even after it had set. Celeste left the marketplace that evening with her heart heavier than it had ever been. As her driver maneuvered through the bustling streets, she watched the fading sunlight paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was the same sunset Ezra was watching, she reminded herself. The same sky stretched over both their worlds, even if those worlds could never truly merge. But the thought did little to ease the ache inside her. When she stepped into her family's estate, the grand halls and towering walls felt suffocating. She had always felt trapped in this house, but now it felt unbearable, like a prison where the only crime she had committed was wanting something real. Ezra stayed at the market long after she had gone. He had expected this outcome. He wasn't naive enough to believe someone like Celeste could truly belong in his world. And yet, her absence left an emptiness he couldn't shake. He tried to convince himself that this was for the best. That loving her, even if he never said the words aloud, would only end in pain. But no matter how many times he repeated it in his mind, it didn't stop him from looking toward the road where she had disappeared, hoping, foolishly, that she might return. Days passed, then weeks. Celeste was forced back into the life she had always despised. Her father, convinced that her distraction had ended, doubled down on his plans for her future. She attended formal events, met wealthy suitors, and played her part flawlessly. But inside, she was breaking. Every conversation felt hollow, every carefully curated interaction a reminder of how little control she had over her own life. The only thing that kept her grounded was the memory of Ezra, the sound of his laughter, the warmth in his eyes, the way he made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Meanwhile, Ezra buried himself in work. He expanded his stall, saved every extra shilling, and refused to let himself dwell on what could never be. He had always dreamed of owning something of his own, of breaking free from the limitations that poverty placed on him. So, he worked harder than ever, waking before dawn, staying long after the market closed. And slowly, his dream took shape. He bought a small space near the market, a modest cafe, nothing grand, but his. A place where he could build something lasting. But even as he reached for his future, a part of him still clung to the past. One evening, as he was closing up the cafe, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned, expecting a late customer, but his breath caught when he saw her standing there. Celeste. She looked different, tired, like someone who had been fighting a battle no one else could see. "You're really here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, stepping closer. "I tried to forget you," she admitted. "I tried to be who they wanted me to be. But I can't, Ezra. I don't want a life without love. Without you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ezra reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her eyes. "Because this won't be easy. It won't be a fairy tale." Celeste let out a small laugh, though her eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I don't need a fairy tale," she whispered. "I just need us." And for the first time in a long time, Ezra let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, love was worth the risk. Because love wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about the worlds they came from. It was about the moments in between, the spaces where two hearts met despite the odds. And as they stood there, the last light of the sun fading around them, they knew that no matter where life took them, they would always be chasing the same sunset. The end.